So again, good evening, guys. Let's continue further. So I was saying, like when you go to the companies today, they are looking for this stack. When you say stack, there are mainly four different things, four different components of the stack. One of them is something called as a database. So M here is representing a database. There are multiple options available. Generally, when you say M, there are two major options available here. One of them is from the NoSQL category. You know, when you say NoSQL, generally people use MongoDB. It is known as Mongo. Mongo, it is coming from a word called the humongous, MongoDB. It can be used for storing a huge amount of data. It supports something called the distributed computing. While another one comes from RDBMS, So from RDBMS, M stands for MySQL. So here, when you talk about M, it comes from the database perspective. The E here stands for Express, the one that is going to provide us something called as maybe you can call this as a web server. Why it is needed? I'll explain all of these things in a minute. So this is called as an Express.js. So M, it comes from a database. E, it comes from a web server called as Express.js. R here is the major component which is going to represent the front end called as React.js, and all of them are represented, or all of them are running on top of something called as a Node.js. So today we'll be starting with all these four components. Out of that, we are expecting you to know either this or that, MySQL or Mongo. So M is something, it is assumed, but we will be working on these three aspects of it. One is called as an Express.js, another one is called as a React.js, and last one, the platform here, is called as Node.js. Now, why they are required, where they are required, all of these things are clarified today itself. So you'll get a clear-cut idea what is needed and what exactly that you are going to learn. Okay. Now, first thing first, let us understand what different things that we are going to see here, so that you can understand maybe you can call this as a syllabus, or you can say all the different topics that we are going to learn in this particular job. We'll be starting with the first Node.js, then we'll move to the Express.js, and then we'll be moving to the front end part, something called as React.js. Now, generally what happens here is when you are going for the real world application, say for example, you are using a website. Say for example, it is a Amazon, so you are visiting Amazon.in. So this is generally called as a client side, or this is where we use an application called as a browser, and then we hit a URL here, https://amazon.co.in, whatever it is, So this is where we hit the website. So what happens here is behind the scene, it connects to the internet, and then it connects to the server in which the application is running. So this is generally called as a server. More on that in a minute. So this is the browser, we call it as a client, and this is the server on which your application is hosted or your website is running. Now, when you say it is running, of course, this is a server, this is a machine which is going to have a hardware, which is going to have an operating system, and on top of it, it is running a very special application known as web server. Again, I'll talk more about all of these things later, just giving you a context right now. So when you say this is the web server, this web server could be an Apache, or this web server could be something like Nginx. Both of them are very popular. Out of that, Nginx is more powerful than Apache, but this is the website where your website is hosted. This one is also connected to a database, So this is my database. It could be MySQL, it could be MongoDB, it could be any of the databases that you want to use. This is the clear picture here, This is the network or internet, and this way your client will communicate with the server, something sort of that, by sending a request and by getting a response. More on that in a minute. So this is how they will communicate with each other. Now, why this course is designed, or what exactly you're going to learn this course? In this course, we'll be talking about number one aspect, something like a database. For us, it could be MySQL, because everyone at least knows MySQL. So we'll be using MySQL as a database. One or two demos, I'll use MongoDB as well, but MongoDB is not what we are going to learn here. MongoDB, I'll assume that you will learn on your own, and I'll show you how do you connect with that, okay? The second aspect is something like the web server here. So in the picture, you can see this is the Express.js that we are going to use, Express.js. Inside this, we will be also running, I mean, on the browser side, we'll be running something like React application. So this comes React. React is going to be used on the client side, you can say. And on top of it, we are kind of having a platform. This is the platform. And the fourth thing called as Node.js. Again, these are the four things that we are talking about, and we just saw here, you know. So in the big picture, in the real world, where do you see those components? You see database here, you see Express.js or web server here, you see React here, something like that, and you see something like the Node.js, which is MERN. So these are the components that we are going to learn. Out of those components, what you see on your browser, what you see on your machine or your client machine is generally referred as something called as a front end. So this is nothing but the front end. What you do not see, but it is already there, and that's how you are going to get the data. This is called as the backend. So probably I can say that this is the front end on left hand side, and this is the backend on the right hand side. So precisely, if someone asks me like what we are going to see here, we are going to talk about both front end and the backend. What we are going to have on the front end, we'll be having React. And what we are going to have on the backend, we are going to have Express.js on the backend. So Express.js plus React will create a full stack application. So in short, this entire course is designed to develop a full stack application, which means when you develop this kind of application, you are going to become a full stack developer. When I say full stack, this is nothing but, again, the front end plus backend. Front, that means the user can see it. Backend or the back means it's not something user can see, and that's why we call it as a backend. So we are going to develop both the applications here, front end and backend, and that's the reason this is known as a full stack development, or full stack application development. This is what we are going to learn. I hope we got a big picture clear here. So what are we going to do here? We are going to do the full stack application development. Now, let us understand what we are going to see in each one of them. So what are you going to see in the Node.js? What are you going to see in the Express.js? What are you going to see in the React? And then we'll start talking about the actual topic. So there are multiple things that we are going to see here. There are multiple topics. There are multiple, you can say, the options available here that we are going to explore, and we'll develop the full application here, full stack application here. Okay, so as you can see here, we'll be starting with this part first, Node.js. Let's see one by one what different things are we going to see here. Okay, so we'll be starting with the first part, and that is something called as a Node.js. Node.js, it is going to represent something called as a platform. Now, why it is called as a platform? What's the speciality about it? Why should we use Node.js? When should we use Node.js? When not to use Node.js? I'll answer all of these all of these points later. But we'll be starting with the basis of it. I'm assuming that you do not know anything. That's how we will start with, and that's how we'll kind of we'll set our tone also. So I'm assuming that you do not know anything. At least there are a few things I'm expecting, but at least from the global perspective, or from the job perspective, let's say front-end job perspective, back-end job perspective, I'm assuming you do not know anything, and then we'll start from scratch. So today we'll be starting with the getting started with it. So we'll understand what different things are there, what is the syllabus of it, what are we going to cover, and what are we are not going to cover. What are the prerequisites of it, so on and so forth. Once we understand the context, we'll be driving into something called as a web architecture. Very important. Unless you understand web architecture, you won't be able to understand how the client and server communicate with each other. Because when you say web architecture, this is something called as a client server architecture, or it uses a client server architecture. When I say it uses client server architecture, the client here is called as a front end, the server here is called as a back end. So it uses client server architecture. It uses a protocol called as HTTP or HTTPS. Yes, both of them are different, and both of them needed to be configured separately. I'll show you how it has to be done, but precisely this is what we are going to know. We are going to use HTTP and HTTPS. Both of them are different. Okay, so how do we use that? We'll talk about that in the web architecture. Okay, how do we use the HTTP protocol, or who is going to provide us the HTTP protocol? We'll talk about that here. We'll also talk about something called as the request and the response. This is called as request response pattern. So when we talk about the web architecture, we are talking about a client-server architecture. We are talking about a protocol, how the HTTP works, how the HTTPS works, and then we will talk about the request response pattern. I mean, how the client creates a request, it will be sent to the server, and how the server responds back by using an object called as a response. So there is web architecture, and these all things we will be discussing there. Out of that, this thing will be using a lot on client side. This will be using, I mean, this will be creating, or maybe you can say synthesizing on the server side. How? We'll see that slowly. Once we understand that, we'll go to the next point, something called the browser architecture. This browser architecture is going to be very helpful for us to understand how the Node.js started. I mean, what do you mean by Node.js? So this answer, you can find it out from the browser's architecture. Any browser today, for example, you consider Chrome, you consider Firefox, you consider Safari, you consider any damn browser out there, every browser is based on this browser architecture, where there are actually five major components, starting with network component, rendering engine, browser engine, user interface component, and finally something called as a web storage component. All these components, they are having their own, maybe you can say own functionalities, but out of that, the most important one, which is using, or which is kind of giving you the best performance from the browser's perspective, is called as the JavaScript engine. This JavaScript engine is also known as the browser engine. So the browser engine, or something called as a JavaScript engine, it is the core part of any browser today. Out of that, the one which we are going to explore, the one which we are going to use a lot, and on top of it, Ryan Dahl, the person who created Node.js 2009, he has entirely added a full form of a framework on top of it to create something called as Node.js. This is where we'll understand, like, what do you mean by Node.js? What is the Node.js architecture? How does it look like? Or what exactly the Node.js built upon? What do you mean by framework? Or what kind of frameworks are available there? So on and so forth. We'll see like how the application gets compiled, So how the JavaScript application or JavaScript applications work under in this particular architecture, in this particular platform, which is called as Node.js in this particular aspect. So we'll understand how does it work. What exactly it contains? To be honest, it contains two things majorly. It contains many things, but majorly it contains two things. One is called the V8 engine, which is like a V8 browser engine or JavaScript engine created by Google. It is created by Google for a browser called as a Chrome. Later on, the Ryan Dahl is the person who created the Node.js. He took out that from Chrome and he created an entire framework on top of it called as a Node.js. So we'll understand what is the V8 engine and how this is used to compile your application or run your JavaScript application by converting it into something called as WebAssembly. This is the assembly language for any browser out there. So this one is going to be the core part of Node.js. So when you are going to run your application with Node.js, JavaScript application with your Node.js, who executes it? This is executed by V8 engine. Now, along with the V8 engine, you also will be able to talk to your operating system. You will also be able to get all the functionalities of your operating system. Like if I want to communicate with my operating system, checking like what are the hardware components I'm having, or maybe how can I create a thread, or how do I get the socket created. All of these things are possible in Node.js because of this library called as libuv. So your entire Node.js is based on these two components, V8 engine and libuv. So libuv will give you an operating system access. So let me mention that this is going to give me an operating system access. Whatever happens in the Node.js which is related to operating system, this is done via libuv. Browser will not give you access to operating system. It's a security breach. Any hacker can use a browser and can talk to operating system and get the sensitive information of your machine. This should not be possible, and that's the reason browser will not give an access to operating system. But inside browser, what is missing? These guys have added by using libuv, and that's the reason using Node.js you can definitely talk to your operating system. That's a libuv, second component of Node.js. Now, if you understand or if you want to understand the Node.js architecture, you should look at something called the event loop. This is called the event loop architecture. This is the loop. Loop means it's a continuously running cycle. Now, what it is continuously running for? It is continuously running for checking with the events and executing those events one by one. This is called as a single threaded architecture. So this event loop is managed by a single thread, and that is why it is known as single threaded architecture. Again, more on that when we go to that topic. But this is the major reason why Node.js is faster than the other frameworks out there. Why people have started using Node.js a lot. Why many companies they already have shifted, and many of them are shifting from old technologies to React, or all technologies to Node.js based the front end and based the backend. So this is the reason behind it. Single threaded application. More on that in tomorrow's session. But this is the architecture of Node.js. Then we'll talk about the very important concept of it, something called the modules. Why Node.js very popular? It is very popular because it has got hundreds and thousands. Now, maybe you can say 100,000 applications which are known as the modules. Module, in case of Node.js, is a unit of reusability. In a sense, if you want to understand or if you want to use something in multiple applications, don't have to copy paste every time. You can create a library. That library is called as a module. There are many third-party applications available there. The the Express.js is also one of the modules out there, and there are many others. For example, there is something called as a helmet. We'll be using it for security reason on the backend side. We'll be using something called as a course. We'll be using something like MySQL connector, MySQL 2, and the list is quite huge. We'll be talking about all of them later. There are many packages that we have to use on both front end side as well as on backend side. So this way, if you want to reuse something in Node.js, it is done by using modules. And again, those modules are also known as NPM modules, where NPM stands for Node Package Manager. Then once we understand the basics of it, we'll start talking about the more important topic, something called the synchronization, or synchronous and asynchronous. Again, when you go for synchronous and asynchronous, this is the only way you are going to work with backend when you are going to implement something called as REST API. Understand this. Asynchronous I'm talking about. So synchronous versus asynchronous, we'll be talking about something called as async keyword, await keyword, again, and the promises. All of them will be kind of using here, or programmatically will be kind of instantiating here in Node.js. And the last part in Node.js will be talking about something called as HTTP server. This is the most important reason why we are here to develop a web server. So HTTP server is mainly used for designing and developing a web server. So this web server will be created by using Node.js. If you look at the placement of it, this is where web server is hosted. So if you look at this server, I'm calling this as a server because it is running a component called as a server. And this server will be designing with HTTP server. So in Node.js, there is only one way to create a server, and that is called as HTTP server. But designing application and developing application using HTTP server, it's very difficult. I mean, you will see that maybe a couple of days after tomorrow, you will see like it is not only difficult, it also is very bulky, and it is not maintainable, it's not flexible. That is the reason why we'll not use this. This is the basis of it. We'll understand like what exactly does it do, how exactly the socket starts, how exactly it starts listening on this, so on and so forth. But we'll not be using this as our final backend server. For our final backend server, we are going to move to the next part. This is called as Express. This one is going to tell you how do we develop a better application on the backend side. Why should we use the Express? I'll talk about that later. When you talk about something like the Express here, Express is developed on top of HTTP server. So HTTP server is a base and Express is kind of, you can say, a framework built around the HTTP server, which is used for developing REST APIs. So think about it like this is the HTTP server and this is the Express. Express is developed on top of HTTP server for implementing something called as REST APIs. Now, in the diagram, I said that whenever you are working on a browser here, let's say you are developing, sorry, you are using Amazon.com, for example. So if you are looking at the images or the products or their information, this information is coming from the server. Now, how are you getting the data from the server? It is done by calling APIs. So this is where the APIs come into picture. And these APIs can be developed in one of the following ways. Let me mention that here, So you can develop these APIs, or you can let the front end and back end communicate with each other using REST, using GraphQL, using gRPC, using protobuf, it is known as, and using socket. So whenever you are talking about getting the front end and back end communicating with each other, there are many options. These four are very popular options, So this is where we'll kind of using the REST APIs when we are developing something called an Express application. So understand this, Express is pretty popular for developing the REST APIs. REST stands for representational state transfer, which uses JSON as an option or JSON as a format in order to communicate or in order to send or receive the data to and from the client. This is what we'll be understanding, like what exactly do you mean by REST here, or what exactly do you mean by the methods? These are called as HTTP methods, so on and so forth. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about what are the parameters or how this routing will be done in case of this, so on and so forth, parameters here in case of REST foundation. So in case of REST foundation, we'll be talking everything about the REST, the design pattern itself. By the way, REST is not a protocol. REST is a design pattern, and this design pattern is pretty popular while developing your backend application. Now that reminds me, if it is not a protocol, there is one protocol, or there was a protocol called as a SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol, which we were using earlier by using XML behind the scene. But nowadays, that SOAP is replaced by REST APIs, and REST nowadays is kind of replacing by something called the GraphQL. More on that later. Okay, so we'll be starting with the Express by using or by first understanding what is the REST. Once we understand REST, we'll start looking at the core topic of this Express.js, which is called as a routing. Everything happens in Express using the routing. Now, under routing, there are two things. One is called as a simple, or simply it is called as a routing, and another one is something called as the advanced routing. The advanced routing means the routing which will accept the parameters, or the routing which will be done dynamically. These are called as a dynamic routing. Important things in Express. This is like the routing part of it. Without routing, you cannot write even a hello world application in React. So Express works solely on this topic called as routing. Okay, now once you start working on this Express, you will also start adding some properties or functions using something called the middleware. The name itself is telling you middleware. It sits in the middle between the application and then the caller. So this is called the middleware. Now again, we'll talk about many middlewares there, something like a DB middleware or filter middleware or custom middleware. So all of these middlewares are used for adding some functionalities inside your REST application before the application or before the request hits to the actual API. More on that later. More important thing for us to get the data from user and persist it in a database, and that's the reason later we'll start communicating with the database. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be showing both the examples. MySQL is a prominent one, but I'll also give you a kind of quick demonstration of how do we connect it to the MongoDB by using something called as Mongoose. It's called as Mongoose. Mongoose is a maybe you can call it as a framework which is used for communicating with the Mongo database. Very simple, very straightforward. You don't even have to know MongoDB if you are using Mongoose. It is that simple because it's programmatic way to access the MongoDB. But I'll show you the examples in both Mongoose as well as MySQL. Later on, we'll talk about how do we handle the errors and how do we get the things validated here. Validate means we'll have to get the input validation, or we have to go for a response validation before the response gets sent, so on and so forth. There are multiple different things which you can do. You have to understand here in order to get the input sanitized. This is called as a sanitization. The sanitization also includes something called as checking for the attacks. These are called as SQL attacks, or you can understand that users are, or rather hackers are pretty much interested in your database or in your data stored in the database. That's the reason we want to protect that by sanitizing all the requests by doing the validation there. This is an example here. There are many other things out there, but this is one of the examples there. Next, we'll talk about more important thing, something called an authentication and authorization. Authentication and authorization, both of them are the ways to add the security in your application. When you say authentication, this is the major reason, or this is the major way to check if the user is legitimate or user is valid by comparing user's email and the password. While authorization, it means checking if the authenticated user has enough permission. So we are talking about the permissions here, and to implement this implementing this permission will be done by using something called as JWT token. This is done by JWT token. JWT stands for JSON Web Token. So we will be using JWT token or JWT, which is going to help us to check if the user is authorized or not. So authorization and authentication, those are two different things. Authentication means checking if user is valid, and authorization means already authenticated user whether has got enough permissions in the application. Then we'll talk about something like uploading the files. Could be of any type, like the image files or something like a doc files or the PDF files, so on and so forth. This will be done by using using a package called as a Multer. Very simple, but at the same time very powerful. This is the one which will help us to upload the files from client to the server side, file uploading. Then we'll talk about implementing security in terms of, again, sanitization, in case of encryption. I'll write a couple of things here. Maybe I can call this as an encryption, which will be done by using something called a crypto.js. So we can achieve something called a confidentiality. So the sensitive data should be encrypted. We'll be doing that by using crypto.js. We'll be also looking at the SQL attacks. We'll be also going for something like a Helmet. Helmet is again third-party library which is used for checking or validating the inputs. Helmet it is known as. Another important thing here is something called the socket programming. Now, socket programming is mainly used for live connection. Like for example, when you are going for live chat, so you are using a WhatsApp, and if you are typing something, the other user sees that you are typing, or if someone is typing, you can see the other user is typing. You are sending a message, immediately it will be delivered to the other user. This is done via socket programming. We'll be developing a live chat application. So as I type the message, my user immediately get the message. Socket programming is used behind the scene, and we'll be talking about this using something called as socket.js. Very important in today's world to get the things delivered as quickly as possible. Socket programming, that's the best option for you to do that. Again, socket.io is a third-party library. Socket.io it is known as. Next, we'll be talking about another important thing, sending emails. We'll be using something called a node mailer for that. Node mailer, this is the framework, this is the library again, or this is the npm package again, which is used for sending emails here. Now, sending emails, when we are developing a capstone project, in that case, sending a welcome message or sending OTP, two-factor authentication it is known as, all of these things will be implemented via emails. I'm not taking an example of SMS here because SMS is not free. Email system is free. For SMS, you have to purchase certain plans. That's the reason SMS is not something I'm talking about. If you are having some kind of free service, you can give it a shot, which is almost similar to this, except calling the email API, you just call the SMS API. Okay. But this is something like sending an email. And finally, we'll be deploying this application on top of AWS. And this will be done for all of our components. It's not only for this, we'll be deploying all the components of your application on none other than AWS. And how do we do that? I'll talk about it later. Actually, I'll be talking about two things here. One is the AWS. This is for cloud or VM implementation. And I also talk about how do we get it done, or how do we go for Dockerizing it or containerizing the Express application as well. Again, you see here, we are talking about the platform, which is going to provide the ways or APIs to run the application there. Next is the Express. Express, as I said, this is nothing but the web server. And finally, once you understand the backend system clearly, we'll talk about the major portion, the major part of this course called as React. And React, this is nothing but the front end. So we'll be talking about all aspects of it. This is the front end. Now, pay attention here. There are many things that we'll be talking about here. First thing, we'll understand what exactly the React is. Precisely, React is used for developing something called as a SPA type of application. Don't get me wrong, not that SPA that comes to your mind right now. This SPA means single application, a single page application. Here you are having only one page known as index.html. No other HTML there. Everything will be added inside the HTML itself. Only one single HTML itself. So we'll understand the basics of it. What is SPA? What are the advantages of it? What are the disadvantages of it? Why Amazon-like websites still are not using SPA? Or when should we use SPA? So on and so forth. So SPA foundation, we'll first start with it, and then we'll talk about a React. So as I said, React is used for developing SPA type application, a single page application. So is it the only one? No. There are many other options available. There's an Angular, there is a Vue.js, there's a Civlet, and there are many other options available there. Remix, one of them. When you talk about the React shines compared to all of them, simply because it's a lightweight library. Again, very important, and at the same time, very popular as well. Sorry, it's a lightweight library. It is not a framework. Angular, on the other hand, is a framework, but React is a very simple, very lightweight library. And this library is developed in JavaScript. As you notice here, everything here is in JavaScript. Express.js, React.js, Node.js, everything here is in JavaScript. So this is where we'll understand like what exactly the React is, where exactly it is used, why is it popular, and what are the advantages of React compared to another ones here. Okay, so this is the foundation for React. The next one, this is the core part of React. The entire React UI development will be done by using JSX. JSX stands for JS plus XML. So when I say XML, here we'll be using the tags, and those tags come from the XML structure. That's why it is called as XML. But here we'll be using HTML. Of course, we're not going to use XML. We'll be using HTML there. So JSX is something like JS plus XML. And this is the only way to design UI, which is used for designing user interface in React. So if you want to go for React, we are going to design that user interface by using something like a JSX syntax. Okay. Now, why React is very popular, or why React is very fast here? It is very popular, it is very fast because of the core components. This is called as a component. What is a component? A component is a reusable entity. It is a reusable entity, which means this entity can be reused at many locations or in many places. You don't really have to write the same code again and again. So you can just go for reusability, keeping in your mind, and develop your entire website. This is done by using the components. It can be as small as the part of your page, or it can be as big as the entire page itself. Very popularly used in React.js, called as the components. We'll be also talking about two types of the components, which is called as a class-based, and we'll be using something called as a function-based, or it's also called as the functional component. We'll see like what's the use case of it, and why should we use function rather than using class component. What are the advantages of using a functional component over class component? Again, we'll talk about that there. When we go for components, when we go for React.js, this is another core property of React. It is called as props and state. The props, it stands for properties, and the state, it's the way the component is going to store some data temporarily within the component's memory. It is called as a state. This is called as the props. Props means the properties. This is the way the parent component can send some data to the child component. Just listen to me, while the state will be maintained by the component itself. Both of them are very important, and both of them are kind of having the properties like this is read only. And when you talk about the state, this is read writable. This is maintained by every single component itself, called as state. Now, when you talk about the next part, something called the React hooks, very, very, very important. I mean, why React is very popular today? This is because of the React hooks. There are many React hooks there, around 17. Out of that, we'll be talking about at least 9 of them. Few of them, not going to write every single thing here, but few important one of them, something called as a use state, or something called as a user reducer, something called as a user ref, so on and so forth. As you can see here, all of these functions start with the word use. So React hooks are nothing but those functions, special functions, which are starting with the word use, and they do multiple magical functionalities in React. This is a very important topic, and many a times interviewer generally test the React knowledge based on the hooks topic itself. There are many hooks available, something like a use callback, again use memo, again there are so many options. So precisely there are 9 different, at least I'm saying, the system hooks that we'll be talking about. And more than that, when you use another libraries like React Router DOM or something like a Redux, they are going to bring their own hooks as well. But from React's perspective, we're going to talk about at least 9 different hooks out there. Okay. Now, when you go for using the React or developing the React, as I said, this is nothing but a front-end application. The front-end application is useless unless the front-end is appealing to the user. Nowadays, it is important for us to know how do we develop the application in multiple themes. For us, there are 2 themes. One is called as a light theme, and another one is something called as a dark theme. So to implement this, of course, we have to write the code. We'll see like how do we get it done. Precisely, this has to be implemented by using CSS, and we'll talk about that in more details when we go for that. But this is where we are kind of implementing the themes. Now, when you are developing a website, it's not only the read-only website that we have to develop. We have to also get the input from user. Let's say sign up, sign in, when you are adding something, when you are sending email, for example, multiple different things. This is where we'll be talking about how do we get the user's input and how do we do the client-side validation. For example, when I say validation, this could be something like an empty validation, whether the user has entered something or not, or by using something called as regular expression, so on and so forth. We'll be using a very popular third-party library called as React Forms. Sorry, this is called as React Forms. And we'll talk about this in details, like why exactly this library is going to be useful. What exactly does it do? We'll see that in the real world, like how do we get them developed here. We also, when we are going for React forms, we also will check the errors. Like sometimes you see that if the user has not entered the password properly, you see a message like the password is not strong. So we can get those kind of errors and trap them and put them or maybe show them to the user by using React forms. Again, very advanced level, but again, we'll see. We'll try to get it done by using regular expression plus React forms there. Next, very important subject and very important topic in React called as React routing. Now, for example, when you are developing multiple pages, you want to go from one page to another page there, So this is where we are going to talk about the routing. So routing is mainly used for switching between the components. Switching between the components or switching between the pages, you can say. I'll call this as a component right now, but you can call them as pages as well, because pages are nothing but the components, So you are going to switch between them by using something called as a routing. Now, routing today is done by using one of the two ways. One popular library is called as React router, and another popular library is called as a MERN Stack router. I'll show you both of them. Personally, I love using both of them, but again, it choice is yours, whichever that you are going to use. I would prefer go for React router DOM. It's like a more, maybe you can say, mature one, but MERN Stack router is also good, and I'll show you a demo of both of them. Okay, React router. Then we will try getting those APIs which we developed here, a REST API which we developed here by calling the services. Now, when we are going to call services, there are multiple ways you can do it. One of the prominent ways is something called an Axios. It's also pronounced as an Axios, Axios or Axios, whatever you say. So we are going to use this framework, not framework, we are going to use this library in order to communicate with the backend, Axios. We'll be also going to use something called as a React query, very popular today, which is kind of providing, maybe you can say functionalities on top of some base libraries, like for example, fetch, JavaScript fetch, it is known as, So you can go for fetch, you can go for Axios, you can go for React query. I'll show you the React query also, which is very popular today, Anyways, so this is consuming the APIs. And when I say consuming the APIs, we'll be consuming the REST APIs to start with. So this is the REST. Okay. So the REST APIs will be consuming by using either one of them, either both of them. Some components will do this, some components will do that. So you can see how you can do that by using, right? Okay, fine. So next we'll talk about important point, something called the context API and something called the Redux. It is possible for us to share some data with multiple pages by using something called the context API, which is like an inbuilt. I'll just write here the context API, which is inbuilt. In a sense, you don't have to do any kind of installation for that. It's inbuilt functionality, which is also important. Probably, as I showed last time, we want to change the theme from dark to light or light to dark. In this particular case, you are going to save the content, like you are going to save like which theme user has used previously, or whether the user is logged in or not, or maybe some user's name, so on and so forth. It will be stored inside something called as a context API. With this context API, we also will see how do we write some custom hooks. Very advanced topic, but at the same time, very important topic from the interview perspective, how to write the custom hooks and how we can use them in various different places. Again, that custom hook we'll be using here inside something called as a context API as well. Again, another important point there. When you are going to share the data with multiple components, it is okay to go for context. But when you are going to share the data with all components, we'll be using something called as Redux. Very popular. It is called as a global store. And believe me, it's very simple if you understand the technique behind it. You will understand it by developing a whole application, by implementing something as a cart feature in that application, in an e-commerce application then. This is called as the context API and something like the Redux. Okay. Now, these days, if you are using any of the applications there, they are involving the payment in them. And we will definitely go for implementing entire payment workflow, starting from nothing to getting the orders from user, maybe canceling them, refunding them, so on and so forth. For this, we'll be using something called as Stripe Payment Gateway, or I'll say it's only the Stripe Gateway. This is the gateway we'll be using. It's very simple, not that simple, but all I'm trying to encourage you. It's very simple for you to implement it compared to others. PayPal and others, they are having their own SDKs, but they are not pretty useful in India right now. So probably Stripe is the best example. Many websites are using it, so we'll be using the Stripe Gateway there. So this is the third-party API there. And then finally, we'll be deploying this application on AWS again. As I said, I'll be showing the deployment in two aspects. One, AWS, that is the cloud deployment here. Another one is the Docker or containerized deployment here. How do we deploy this application inside the container? We'll be saying both of them. Now, other than that, as I said, we'll be using a socket. Where is it? Socket programming in the backend. We also will be using the live chat feature right here. Live chat application here on the front end side as well. So front end is where user is going to type the messages, and using backend socket.io will be passing that data, we're passing that messages to all the other users there. That's how we are going to see here. When you talk about the topics here, I think you can see we are going to start with nothing. By the way, I'm assuming everyone having a no knowledge of front end, back end, and even the platform will be starting from scratch. I'll talk about the prerequisites though, but there is nothing that I'm assuming that you already know, and we'll be starting with completely completely from scratch, and then we'll be developing the whole application there, the back end, front end, and of course the maybe the framework application here. uh, I am not promising, but if time permits, I will talk about that. Who's that? Shubham. So maybe I can write it somewhere. If time permits, we'll talk about this part as well. GraphQL from front end and the GraphQL from back end as well. Okay. So we'll develop the application by using this one. Yep. Okay, someone is saying there are too many topics. These are the minimum topics you have to know in order to get the MERN application developed in the real world. If you are passing, I mean, if you are just if you're just learning this for maybe just getting something out of it, I think that's not for you then. This is pretty serious web development. This is pretty serious application development, where if you showcase this application to the end user or to your interviewer, definitely you will, I mean, your impression will be way better than you are expecting. So this is a pretty serious web development. Okay, so what exactly that we are going to develop here as a capstone project? So this is a simple project. Again, when I say simple, it's like I'm encouraging you. Don't get it as a simple here. This is a capstone project. This is something called the food delivery application. Now, there are multiple things out there. First thing, there are two parts of this application. One is the admin panel, where the administrators will kind of add the different things or will do multiple things. For example, admin, when they logged in, admin will see like how many how many food items are there, or how many dishes are there. For example, maybe I can say number of food items, or maybe something like a number of users or number of orders, so on and so forth. So admin can see all of that in one single go. This is generally called as a dashboard. Then food item management, meaning adding a food item, or maybe we can say if something is not supported anymore, deleting it, or maybe the price has changed, updating it and querying it, or maybe I can say listing, and all of these things here related to the food items, very simple. Next, the order management. Now, order cannot be deleted, but you can say order listing here. Order will be placed by the client or placed by the user, but order will be listed here. So listing of the orders, maybe I can say updating the order. Say, for example, if the customer sends an order, places an order, let's say I want this food item to be delivered. So when the from the admin side, when someone goes to deliver that, will change the status of it, saying yes, the maybe you can say your order is out for the delivery, and immediately the user will get an email. That's why we are going to send that emails here. So this is going to happen live. This is going to happen live. Listing or updating, and sometimes if you want, you can cancel as well. Like sometimes someone is sending an order which cannot be fulfilled for some reasons, you are going to cancel it. That's how it is. User management, again, you are going to see the list of users. So this is like a listing. I mean, some user is not behaving properly, for example. So we can block a user, or you can unblock the user. We can reset the password. I mean, force reset the password, and so on and so forth. Multiple things out there from the user's perspective. Another important thing is live chat, where we are going to use socket.js. That's the reason why we are going to learn this. This is going to be advanced one. So when you are placing an order and something is not working, think about from the real world perspective, Blinkit, for example. If something is not working properly, you are going to send a message to your administrator from the customer portal or user portal there. So this is from administrators, not like the end user will see. This is only for the administrators. Now, what customer portal is going to have? Customer portal means that portal or that website which is going to be used by the actual users. These are the customers, they will use it. First thing, it's the user's workflow. When I say user's workflow, there will talk about sign up. Okay, I forgot to mention that. Let me do it here. When you say sign up, the sign up will be implemented by using one of the two ways. This is like the website or custom sign up in a sense. Will be using your the user's email and the password to let the user sign up. Plus, we'll be also going for social sign up as well. When I say social sign up, this means login with Gmail or login with Google. You can call it as not Gmail, login with Google or login with something like Apple or login with GitHub. We'll see a few of the options available here for sign up feature, of course. Then there is a sign in, then there is a forget password or forgot password, where two factor authentication will be used to send the live token or the live key OTP, you can say, on email. And when user enters the email, user will be able to reset the password. So that is forgot password. This is live data or live code that or live application will be developing. Then under food search or food items, we'll be searching and filtering the food items. Let's say, for example, I'm looking for pizza. So you can click on the pizza and you can see all the pizzas. Then you can filter them. Like I'm looking for medium, I'm looking for large, I'm looking for XYZ type of pizza. Filtering. Filtering will be done on client side. Searching will be done on the server side. What's the meaning? We'll see that implementation there. Then we can go for review management. Like if I like if I already ordered a pizza or already ordered a food item, for example, and I really like it, then I can go and review it, which is going to be like the rating, which will be shown to the user, and plus some comments. So whatever that you feel about it, like it's very good, it's not bad, so on and so forth. So whatever the comments are there, you are going to pass the comments and the ratings in under review for a particular item. Now, very important, car implementation. In the car implementation, we are going to use a Redux.js here. This is the reason why we'll be learning the Redux here. So Redux mainly used for implementing cart on the client side, and of course, we'll be putting it on the server side as well. So whenever you like particular food item, you're going to put that in the cart, and then you can go for the checkout. So checkout is where you are going to go for payment with the Stripe. So payment with Stripe is like real payment will be done. Of course, we'll go for testing mode first. Everything is working fine, and then we'll switch it to the production mode as well. But changing the testing mode and production mode, it's not important. Getting it implemented is very important. It's a little bit complicated to see the entire flow, but yes, we'll be doing it here in this particular capstone project. Next, we'll be going with the orders. I'm customer, I want to see my own orders. If I do not want any order I placed accidentally, or if I do not know, do not use that or do not look for that order anymore, I can cancel an order also. Whenever you are going to cancel an order, an email will be generated, and a notification will be sent to the admin as well. So probably I can say notification. So this is the notification, and this is what we are going to do, or we are going to send immediately to the admin panel. And finally, we are going to have a live chat with the administrator. That's what I said last time also in the admin panel. So as a customer, if I'm having some queries, the queries will be resolved by talking to the customer, live chat to the administrator rather. So the customer can talk to the administrator and get the queries resolved. It is what we are expecting from our application. I hope you can understand, or you can see like how the whole application might look like, and this is how we can get the things done. Just a second, I'm going to go back here and search for Figma, and let me open my Figma and show you a small UI of it. I already have purchased one, so I can go back here and show you how does it look like, what is that we are expecting from this application here. This is going to be a pretty much live application, you can see, and live in a sense this is going to be more than enough production application that we are going to start with. So this is the UI for the application. As you can see, it's pretty complicated, and it's pretty as good as you are developing or as good as you are using a real world application. This is where we can go for designing the entire UI without using any framework. We'll be writing the plain CSS. So if you know CSS, more than sufficient. So this using plain CSS will be designing this entire UI. So where we can go for maybe you can say order UK. Simple example. This is a this is a kind of a Figma design that I'm going to use, and we'll be kind of developing the application like that. We'll be having some how many items are there. I mean, how much you have added to the cart. Login or sign up. We'll be showing a model there to get the user's input, so on and so forth. Below that, you can go for some categories like chef burgers London, blah blah blah, something like that. We can also go for categories, so like the burgers and food, salads, or maybe pasta. You click on that and you will see the items in that particular category. Something like option to click the or maybe open the App Store or the Google Play for this application. Not that we are going to develop it, but just a placeholder for that. We partner with us and ride with us. Right now, I mean, in this particular case, these are just the banners. But if time permits, we can go for creating a small page for them as well. Then we are going to have something like the frequently asked question, who we are, some static pages, how do we go for partner program, and some help and support. But again, that will be a static pages. Again, we can get this data live from our backend system, and then we can go for developing this entire application here. So this is our, maybe you can say, the way we are going to develop this application. So entire UI will be developed here in the class live and using plain old CSS. Not a single framework will be using for this application, because I want you to understand functionality in React more than learning something like the backend, sorry, something like a Bootstrap and a Tailwind. I'll be having some more sessions on that, but not here in this one. We'll see that later. This way, we are going to go for live or simple CSS. So if you know CSS, we're going to get it done using that CSS there. Okay. This is where we can get the models done. So this is where we can add the postal code, or you can see, OTP, or you're going to go for, probably getting some other models here. These are called the models. We'll talk about them. This is how the cart will look like. We are calling it as a basket. We can call it as a cart, where we can see all the items added here. You can see also an example here, like the margarita pizza or polo pizza, which is added here. You can change the quantities. You can go for finding out the final price. And when you say next step, it will open the Stripe payment and it will get the Stripe done. This is where we are kind of looking for some customized order. Like if you are selecting a pizza, we can say like, what are the toppings available there? And you can choose them, and then you can place the order. Finally, you can, while placing the order, you can also add some kind of request notes, like deliver it at this time or blah, 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 blah. And you say add, and this will place an order. I mean, this is a simple theme that we are going to use for developing this whole application there. And again, as I said, this application will be developed from scratch again in the class using pure CSS, no third-party frameworks, no Tailwind, no Bootstrap. There's like a plain old plain old CSS file. That's it. And this is how we'll be developing the whole application. I'm not showing any kind of admin panel, but admin panel will be like showing the list of orders, and it will be very simple. But from the customer portal side, it's going to be very fancy. This is what we are kind of getting an invitation here. Yes, so I think this is what we are going to start with, and this is what we are going to finish. This is called as a food delivery application. I'll share that file later with you. By the way, this is free actually available. So maybe you can get it and you can start writing the code along with me if you want. Otherwise, you can follow me. I mean, you can see what I'm doing here, and you can also watch the video and do that later on your own. But this is what the application that we'll be developing. And yes, this application can be developed, or all of these things which I'm saying here can be finished within 1 month. More than sufficient. Don't worry. Again, from scratch. I'm not expecting anything that So we'll be starting from scratch, and this is more than sufficient for us to develop the whole things which I mentioned here. More than that, actually. This is something like the basics of it. I mean, we have to finish them within the time, and we'll be getting them done in next 1 month. Okay. Yes, a single sign-in functionality that is called a social sign-in, which will be there. So this is what we are talking about. Okay. Fine. I think you got a good picture here, like what exactly, probably you can see in this particular course, what exactly that we are going to cover, and what exactly that you are going to have an expectation from this course. Very important, what are the prerequisites here? Because as I said, I'm going to assume you do not know anything about the front end or back end, but at least these things are expected. One, good hands-on HTML. I mean, you should not, I mean, I'm not expecting you to be a very good designer, but at least basics of HTML you should know. Like, what do you mean by tag? How do you write a tag? What do you mean by H1 to H6, div tag, maybe something like input tag, so on and so forth. You should know JavaScript. This is the requirement of this class because the whole stack is developed in JavaScript. It's a fundamental language. Without that, can't be done. So JavaScript is the fundamental language. This is mainly used for designing or decorating the entire website. And as I said, we are going to use pretty basic CSS. Nothing fancy. I mean, nothing great about it. I know you already must be at least heard about CSS. You must be using some CSS, but this is something like the expectation here. Do not worry. I'll be passing the notes for all of them. Like what I'm expecting here, I'll be passing in the no, I mean, I'll be passing that notes maybe day after tomorrow. So again, I'm not going to ask you like read this. No, I'll pass the notes and I'll ask you read all of these things from those notes. Okay, so that will be also kind of, you can say, plus side for it. I mean, it's not like you are going to read anywhere from HTML or JavaScript or CSS from anywhere. The notes will be provided to you. Yes. Okay. By the way, I'm sorry, someone is asking the question which is important for me to answer it here. For React, we'll be using the latest and greatest version 19.0. So don't worry. So probably this is important for you to know. Someone asked that question and it is important for you to know. This is 19.0. We'll be passing on the notes, Sheetal. So don't worry. Yes, and of course, all of these things will be shared with you on the GitHub repository. So I didn't mention it here. This is expected that you should have at least the basic knowledge of Git. Like how do we clone the repository, or how do we get the new data pulled from the repository? We'll be using something called as a GitHub. So probably I'll be sharing that with you on everyday basis. So you can get that data from there. And a little bit of AWS. It's not like you should be an expert in AWS, but at least a little bit AWS is expected. Like what is a cloud, or what do you mean by that? If you can understand AWS in details, nothing like it. But even if it is not, it's all right. We'll be using max to max EC2 instances. So I'm not going to go for the DevOps mode here. This is a very simple EC2 instance that we'll be using in order to deploy our application. Okay, so EC2. What do you mean by EC2? EC2 stands for Elastic Compute Cloud. What it is used for? It is nothing but the VM on AWS. So if you want to create a VM on AWS, this is done by using the EC2 on AWS. So this is how we'll be kind of, developing the whole application from scratch using the theme which I showed you. Those who didn't see that, this is the theme of that application. This is what we are going to develop the application from scratch. Again, using pure CSS, not a single framework. Okay. I'll be passing some other videos there for developing the same application using the Tailwind and developing the same application using Bootstrap, but it's not included in the session. This is a little bit advanced part. So I'm not going to waste the time, precious time, talking about the same thing that you already have developed. Okay. So understand that. Okay, yes, all the sessions will be recorded, whoever is asking that question, and it will be provided to you with on the very next day, morning time. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. How the WebRTC traffic is different from socket programming? Shubham, WebRTC is different. It is a protocol which is used for RTC, real-time communication. It is known as. It uses socket behind the scene. Socket programming is a general, and WebRTC is mainly used for streaming purpose. So that's what the difference. RTC uses WebSocket behind the scene. Okay. How an application can handle the multiple requests if the Node.js single-threaded. Hold on, I'll talk about this when we go for architecture in tomorrow's session. How many requests our app would be able to handle? How to create a large scale application? For this, you have to go for something called as DevOps. This is not the programmer side. This is the implementation or ops side. So there we can see how do we go for containerization? How do we go for Docker Swarm? How do we go for Kubernetes? How do we go for auto scaling? So on and so forth. Shubham, hopefully that answers your question. Okay. Fine. I think enough about the project, enough about something like what we are going to see. I have given the whole introduction to the entire session, or you can say entire context or entire syllabus of it. Now, let me quickly introduce myself and then we can start talking about the actual stuff. My name is Amit, having more than 18 years of experience on both teaching as well as developing the applications for my client. Here in Sunbeam, I'm working as associate technical director. And other than that, I live another life. I live two lives, morning 6:30 to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I deliver the sessions and acting as a technical director in Sunbeam. After 2 o'clock till 11 o'clock in the night, I work as a freelance developer working with real world projects. When I say real world projects, I am my clients for whom I develop the application, for whom I get the DevOps setup, for whom I do multiple different things, different projects, I would say, different technological applications I generally developed. So develop numerous mobile applications on iOS and Android platforms using both native and hybrid. For native, I use Java or Kotlin depending on what client requires for Android, Swift for iOS, and for hybrid, I use something called as React Native. This is not included in the syllabus nor in the course. So this is a totally different thing. It uses React, but React Native requires mobile development or mobile understanding first. So this is totally different, but I use this for my hybrid applications there. I've developed many different websites using LAMP. LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, P for PHP, P for Perl, P for Python. I was personally using Python and PHP for that. Perl, not something I have used multiple times for developing the websites, but yes, for P, I was using PHP as well as Python. Mean, here the A stands for Angular. When I develop the applications in both Angular as well as React, depending again on the client's requirement. And then there is a MERN Stack. So nowadays people generally come for React a lot, but earlier they were coming for the Angular as well. So I developed the Angular applications as well, many applications out there. Languages that I use something like a C++, pretty much basics, because without that you cannot develop a performant application. Python for ML a lot. JavaScript and TypeScript. Under JavaScript is used for React and TypeScript is used for Angular. PHP, nowadays I don't use it anymore, but still I know how to develop the applications in PHP. And Go is something which I'm using a lot these days, for developing better performance applications on the backend as well as console applications, or you can say the applications which can be converted into certain jobs, automated jobs. Other than that, I generally work on the DevOps part as well. I've got certain certifications here like Kubernetes, both. Kubernetes has three, but I've just gone through only two of them till now. Didn't get the time to go for the third one. This is for application developer. This is for administrator. There is a CI/CD pipeline, if you have heard about it, implemented in Jenkins. So this is a CJE, Certified Jenkins Engineer. One of my personal favorite tools called as a Docker. Can't live without it these days. So Docker Certified Associate. Security Plus, this is to prove that the applications that we are developing, they are using the security principles that we generally use in the real world. Security Plus. And Linux is like bread and butter. You can't live without Linux. So Linux is the future. If you are using Windows, I would say switch to Linux and start learning Linux. Linux is the future. Anyways, so enough about myself, gave you a pretty much understanding of it. All I'm trying to say here is you are in the good hands. Do not worry about this. We are going to see so many things. You probably will get tired to see those things, but there are many things that I have planned for you. Okay, enough about that. Now let us start with the foundation. This is where we are going to talk about. Oh, sorry, I forgot. And thanks for reminding me, Vivek. I didn't mention it here, but yes, there is a testing as well. I forgot to mention that. Sorry for that. Testing will be done by using something called as a jest plus something called as the karma. Karma is a runner and the jest is the testing or test automation provider. Vivek, that answers your question. Okay, we'll be using jest. Earlier, I was using something called a Jasmine, but Jasmine and Karma, Karma is also not needed. Even jest itself is more than sufficient. So we can go for jest for testing the React applications. Okay. I was using Karma and Jasmine for Angular as well as React earlier, but nowadays I switched to Jest. Okay. Umesh, I wanted to use a TypeScript, but TypeScript itself has its own learning curve. That's the reason why we are shifting to JavaScript instead of TypeScript. Okay. Yes, exactly. Okay, now we can start with the actual content and we'll start, as I said, we'll be starting with the foundation. This is something like a very, very, very basic. So first thing first, we'll understand what exactly do you mean by web architecture very quickly.
First thing, before you can I ask a question.
Yes, Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just finished your AI class and I was wondering about this class as well. So do you think this is going to be benefit combining those tools? two things together?
Yeah. If you remember in AI class, we talked about the UI and we used a very simple framework there. And I said, like, if you are kind of developing a real world application, you need to have some understanding of how to develop the front end and back end application. So this might help you to combine both the knowledge and get something done pretty much what the end user might expect from a real world application. Yes, going to be kind of mix of both. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so we'll be starting with something called the web architecture first. And as I said last time, web architecture is pretty basics. Without this, you cannot understand nor on the front end side. I mean, not on the front end side, nor on the back end side as well. So understand this pretty well. When you talk about a web architecture, it refers to the layout and the design of technologies that define how the data and services are delivered over the network, enabling interaction between something called the clients, that users, and something called as the servers, that is nothing but application. Now, even before we talk about this, let me first define it. I know this is something which is pretty basics, but as I said, I will not assume anything. We'll be starting with pretty much simple things, pretty much scratch. When you talk about something called as a client, what is a client? A client is nothing but the browser. Means whenever you are saying I'm on a client, that means you are on a browser which uses something called as URL. More on that later. Right now, just understand client means browser, browser which is going to interact with the server by using URL. Now, second one and second important thing here is something called as a server. Now, what is a server? People generally are having some myths in their head. Server means a machine. Not at all. Server is not a hardware. Very important, guys. This is not a hardware. This is a software. It is a software, or you can call this as an application. This is a software as an application. There are different types of servers. For example, the one that we are developing is called as a web server. This web server is used to listen on HTTP request. Used to listen HTTP request. HTTP, or you can say HTTPS requests. More on that in a minute. So this is going to listen on HTTP requests. For example, if you want to know what kind of web servers are available in the market, very important and very popular Apache. Another important as well as more than powerful, I mean more than Apache, it is very powerful, called the Nginx. Another one that we are developing right now, the applications in something called as Express.js, and there are a bunch of other options available out there. This is one example or one type of server there. Another type of server could be something like a database server. See, this is also an application. This is the database server. Everyone knows that it is used to store or persist the data, store the data permanently. This is going to store the data permanently. Again, there are two types of databases out there in the market. One is RDBMS. DBMS stands for Database Management System. One of the simplest and very popular is MySQL. Another one, which is something called as a PostgreSQL. Another one, something like a MS SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, then Oracle, and so on and so forth. There are many other options available there. Under something called as a NoSQL, there are again many options available out there. For example, Mongo is the prominent one. It's called as a MongoDB. There is very popular called as a RadiusDB. There is something called as a Neo4j. This is the graph database, by the way. Probably you can also say something like a Redshift, and so on and so forth. There are many other options available. Rather, this list is bigger than RDBMS, but still, just couple of them here. Another server could be something like the file server. Under file server, I mean, this is mainly used for hosting or for serving the files from server to client. Mainly I can say it is used to share file. Used to share files. For example, you might have heard about these servers out there. For example, FTP. FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. So this is very basic and this is very old protocol out there, but this is used for sharing the files with other users. Or you can go for something called the NFS. NFS means Need for speed. No, that is not the NFS here. NFS stands for Network File System or Network File Service. Okay, this is NFS. And another one is something called as a Samba. This Samba is not from Sholi. This Samba is from SMB. It stands for Server Message Block. This is mainly used for Windows to share the data or share the files by using the Windows sharing utility. This is the Samba protocol it uses or SMB protocol it uses. Server Message Block it is known as. So understand this, guys. This is called as a server, which is not a hardware. It is a software or it is an application. The client is also an application called as a browser. Nothing different than that. Okay. Now, when you are kind of developing an application on the server side, or when you are on the server, and if you want to develop or if you want to run something on that, it requires something called as a stack. Sorry, it's called as a stack. Now, when I say stack, this stack is kind of using some different type of applications. This is called as a software stack or application stack. Now, when I say application stack, stack means it's a collection of software, collection of applications that are needed to run the server applications out there. It includes mainly, again, this is from the server stack. I mean, this is from the server's perspective, not the general application stack or not the general software stack. This is on the server side. On server, this is expected to have something called as a web server, which is mainly used for listening on HTTP or HTTPS. Second one, the database. Better for me to write it here. Second one is the database. Third one is something like the user interface framework, or you can say the language, or you can say the library. And the fourth one is a platform. So these are the four things together here called as a software stack. Again, this is called as the database, server, web server, user framework, user interface framework, and there is something called as a platform. Now, when you talk about the software stack on the server side, there are few popular stacks available there. One of them is called as a LAMP stack. This is called as a LAMP. I mean, L stands for platform here. Okay. L stands for Linux, which is a platform. A stands for Apache, which is a web server. M stands for MySQL, which is a database. And P stands for, as I mentioned, Python or Perl or something called as a PHP. All of them were popular languages earlier, not now. We don't use them now. It's kind of deprecated now. No one uses that anymore. People have shifted from LAMP to something like a MERN or MEAN. This could be something called as a WAMP. WAMP means W stands for Windows, and rest is same: Apache, MySQL, Python, PHP, blah blah blah. So when you are developing the applications on Windows, it is called as a WAMP. When you are developing these applications on Linux, it's called as a LAMP. And when you are going to develop these applications on Mac, this is called as a MAMP. So macOS plus all of these things out there. So this is called as a MAMP. LAMP, WAMP, and MAMP. All of them are kind of not used these days. These options were popular earlier. LAMP, WAMP, MAMP. It's called an AMP stack. Okay. Nowadays, there are two which are very famous. One of them is called as the MERN, and the one that you are learning right now. And you know what does it mean? MERN, it could be MySQL or MongoDB, depending on which database that you are comfortable with or your application requires, MongoDB or MySQL. E, as I mentioned, is an Express. R is something called as a React, and N is something called as the Node.js. Okay. Another one which is exactly similar to it, it's called as the MERN Stack. When I say MERN Stack, everything is same: MySQL, MongoDB, Express, React. Except React, this is going to be replaced by something called as an Angular. That's it. So this is a software stack we are talking about. So instead of using React there, we'll be using something called as an Angular. And finally, this is like, there are many others. This is the final in a sense, which is very popular. This is called as a Visa form. Visa, it stands for W Windows, I for IIS server. This is the Windows web server, which is developed by Microsoft free of cost. S stands for SQL server database, and A stands for ASP.NET. This is for developing the user interface using the .NET, using the C# language. So as you can see, there are multiple options available here, and those are known as the software stack, and those software stack, these are, used in different contexts, so you can go for this, or this in order to get the application developed. All of them are open source. This is closed source. In a sense, you are going to need SQL Server license, server license, not IS license, but Windows Server license, or maybe you can go for Windows license itself. So it's a closed source, it's not open source. Rest of them are open source. LAMP, WAMP, MAMP, MERN, MEAN, all of them are open source there. Anyways, so now there are two aspects of it. One is called the client, the other one is called as the server. On the server, what you need is called as a software stack, and that software stack is going to have all these applications out there. Now let's understand, what do you mean by the client, what do you mean by server, front end, back end, so on and so forth. Okay, so when you talk about the web architecture, let me go for an example here after this. So when you talk about the web architecture there, you are going to start with this client side here. When I say client side, this is nothing but the browser. This is where you are going to open the browser and visit a website there. This is called as the client. The client will communicate with a network, or you can say internet, and this is where your server will be connected. This is my server. This is the server. Again, this is called as a server not because whether it has got a good hardware or not, but this is called as a server because on top of it, we are using a web server like server application. Not necessarily it has to be a web server, but web server is an example here, which is connected to the database. So this is an aspect of it. Every server will have a unique IP address. Let's say 18.5.8.9, for example. And this is here mydomain.com. This is the domain that we are talking about here, that we are using here. So on the client side, we visit the URL by saying HTTP blah 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 blah, and then you automatically will see the UI of that browser here. So UI of that website on the browser here. So this is what we generally see in the web architecture diagram. Okay, so there are two sides of it. One is called the client, it's called the front end. When we talk about the client, this is called as the front end. This is where the end user will use the application. So end user uses the front end, and the front end is what user is going to see on his machine using a browser application. The user facing part of the application, which is visible to the user, it runs in a client called as a browser. Browser can be any browser. It could be Firefox, it could be Chrome, it could be Safari, anything, Opera, so on and so forth. It is built with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Understand that. When you are going for this side here, this is called as the client side. And if you want to go for client side languages, there are two options, HTML and JavaScript. HTML can be accompanied with CSS for decoration, and then the JavaScript for adding the client side logic. When you are going for server side here, under server side, you can go for different languages out there. We'll see that in a second. So for example, website, mobile app, SPA, single page applications, which will be developed in React or Angular, all of them are client or front end. Now, when you talk about a server or backend, this receives the request from the client and sends back the responses. So the guy here, sitting on this particular machine will send a request to the server, and server will respond back by using a response object. It handles the business logic, data processing, authentication, database communication, logging, and whatnot. It does many different things on the server side. For example, Node.js, Express, Django, Ruby on Rails, so on and so forth. So here on the server, we are going to use different languages like Java, or you can say the JavaScript. I think it's not all. You can say Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, something like a Perl, or something like the PHP, or something like Python, and bunch of others, bunch of C#, that's for .NET, maybe something like a Go, very popular today, so on and so forth. So there are many options available here on this side to develop for a server-side application. It is known as a backend application. The backend application is also going to be connected to the database, which is going to store and manage the application's data permanently. There are two types of them, as I mentioned, relational and non-relational, also called as NoSQL databases. Yeah, examples I gave you already. So this is a client-side application. This is the server-side application. Now, how do they communicate with each other? To communicate with each other, the client, the one on the left side, this guy here, the one on the left side, is going to send a request object to the server, usually HTTP or HTTPS. When you talk about the client-side communication, or when you talk about the web architecture here, it is said that it is using, or it uses, client-server architecture and request response pattern, and a request, more on that in a second, and a response pattern. So it uses request response pattern and it uses client server architecture. So client server architecture, I'm explaining that right now. This is the client and this is the server. But how do they communicate with each other? How would client talk to the server? It uses a client request response pattern. What does it mean? It means the client sends a request to the server using HTTP or HTTPS protocol. The server processes the request and server communicates with the database if needed, if it is needed to get the data from database. The server sends a response, usually in the JSON or HTML or a text format, and the client displays the result. I mean, this is the overview of it. One more time. On the client side, you are going to create an object called as a request, something sort of that. This is going to have two parts. In a minute, you will talk about it. This is called as a request object. This is also known as HTTP request. And this request object will be sent from the client to the server. So the client will create it. Who in the client will create it? We'll talk about that later. So this is the headers part, and this one here is the body part. So there are two parts of your request. One is the header or headers part. Another one is called as a body part. This request will be sent to the server. So server will get this and server will understand what exactly the request is sent for, what it is sent for. So server, if needed, will talk to the database and will create something called as a response. This one here is a response. Response also has two parts like the request. This is the header part or headers part, and this is the body. This one here is called as the response. So client sends a request to the server and server processes it and send the response back to the client. And the client receives the response, shows that here and says, I'm done. And this is how they will communicate with each other. Of course, via network. And that's the reason in browser architecture, there is something called as a network component, which communicates with the server by sending a request and by getting a response back. I hope you are getting it. So this one here is something called as the web communication, how the client and server work or communicate with each other. This is how they do. One more time. The client sends a request to the server processes the request, server communicates with database if required, server sends a response back to the client displays the result, and it's the end of communication. Very simple. Now, what is the request? Understand that this is going to be important when you are going to develop the backend. The backend will require you to process the request and create the response. So the response generation and the response request parsing will be done by the backend or the Express application out there. So this is the HTTP request. What is it? The HTTP request is a message sent by the client, usually the browser, to the server to request the data or to perform an action. So you in a sense, the client will ask server to get certain thing done. How do we do that? This is where the headers and the body comes into picture. For example, what kind of actions you want the server to take, like view a page, submit a form, fetch an API, so on and so forth. To do this, the request has got two parts, the header part and something called the body part. This is what I was talking about, the header part and the body part here. So under header parts, you are going to have all the key value pairs. This is the collection of key value pairs. Okay, this is the collection of key value pairs. This is called as the headers part. For example, there's a key called as a host, like a domain name of the server, User agent, it's a browser or client information, and there are a bunch of them. For example, there's a cookie, there's a referrer, there's an origin, so on and so forth. All of them are the header parameters will be sent by the client to the server. Now, along with this, it is also going to talk about something called as the method, and there are a bunch of them. The default method is called as a get. What's a method? Method means what client wants server to take an action. Like when you say get means I want to get something from you. Post means I want to update something, not update, I want to insert something on the server. Put means I want to update something, and again delete means I want to delete something on the server. So if the method is non-get or the method is a post or put, you can go for a body which is included in some of the requests like post put, sometimes the patch. It contains the data to be sent on a server, like for example, form data, JSON, file uploads, means the files that is sent by your client, and so on and so forth. All of this information will be added inside the body part. As you can see, there are two parts of your request. The header part, which contains the collection of key value pairs, and the body part, which contains the actual data that needs to be passed to the server. Now, as I was saying, this is the important parameter, something called as a request methods. There are many request methods out there. These are the popular ones. Like the get is to retrieve the data from server. Post, sending a new data to the server. So you are saying like, hey, I want the new data to be inserted in a database. Send it via post. Put, you want to update an existing data on the server. Delete, you want to delete the resource or delete a data or delete a record from server. Patch, it is partially updating a data. If you see, there are two ways you can update the data. One is the post data, and this is like the the patch data. Say post means a full update, and this means it's the partial update. You are not updating the whole data, you are just updating something. Partial update, it is known as. When I say partial update, you're not updating the whole data. You're just updating only the partial data. Like for example, in our order API, so we are going to change the order status, like placed, completed, maybe out for delivery, cancelled, so on and so forth. So this is where we are going to use the patch instead of going for put. Finally, options is to ask server about what is allowed and what is not. That's called an options API. So this is the first part, HTTP request. As you can see here, the client creates a request and sends it to the server. Now, what server does? Server understands what's there in the request, and it processes the request and creates HTTP response. So let's understand what's there in the response now. It is a message sent by the server to the client, like the browser or application or whatever it is, in reply to the HTTP request. So the browser has sent a request or client has sent a request. In order to respond back to this request, the server creates a response with again two things. One, header, another one is something like a body. Forgot to mention, this is the body. Okay, so when you talk about the headers, it contains content type, it contains content length, the cookies, cache control, so on and so forth. More important thing here is the content type. So the client would understand what type of content, what type of response we are going to pass it from server to client. Could be text HTML, application JSON, XML, so on and so forth, whatever it is. So these are the headers which will be passed from server to the client. This also contains another important point, something called the status. More on that in a second. The body contains the actual data written from the server, which could be HTML content, JSON file, text or plain content, and whatever it is. So whatever that you are demanding from server will send that back by using the body here. So last time, as I said, the body contains some extra data or additional information. Here also body contains the additional information. Now, as I said, inside the request, there is an important parameter called as a request methods. Similarly, under response, there's an important parameter, something called as a response code categories. This is called as the status code or response code. This is also known as the status code. Now, I bet you must have seen this. For example, if you are opening any of the browsers, let's say I'm going to go back here and say google.com, I can see the web page here. But if I say something like test.html. I know this file does not exist, but if I try to access it, I'm going to get something called the 404. What is the 404? This is called as a status code. The status code has got different categories. Like for example, the first category, informational responses 100 to 199. These are the informational messages. In socket.io, we'll be studying this response code called as a 101. 101 means switching the protocol. You will start with HTTP and then you are going to use the socket behind the scene. This is called as the socket protocol. I'm sorry, not socket, switching protocol. Means with the socket IO, we'll be sending a HTTP request and it will change it to the socket. How does it do that? More on that later. But right now, the 101 is going to be used behind the scene when the socket IO changes that socket type, or maybe you can say connection type, from HTTP to socket. Now all successful responses will lie between 200 to 299. So when I get a 200 means success. This is very popular. 200 means it is okay. Everything is going great. 201 means created, and so on and so forth. Redirection, this is from 300 to 399. For example, if you sometimes hit google.com, it instead of going to google.com, it goes to google.co.in. This is because when you hit to this website like google.com, it sends a response saying 301. It says the website that you want to access does not exist here. It is redirected to google.co.in, and automatically it opens the google.co.in. This is redirection API, redirection response statuses. The client error, very popular. 400 means something has gone bad. It's called a bad request. 401 unauthorized. 403 forbidden. 404, that's what I just showed you right now. File not found or resource not found. 405 method not allowed. So there are many different options available there, which will tell you something has gone wrong and the error is not of the server, the error is of client. This is called the client's error message. And lastly, this is the server error response, which means when we are talking about the something is going wrong on the server side, like when you are developing Express application, the application crashes. Whose fault is it? Is it my fault or client fault? Or is it the application's fault on the server? It's an application fault on the server. This is represented by using server responses. So again, there are 5 categories of them. I'm not saying 5 status messages, but there are 5 categories of them. Informational messages, successful messages, redirection messages, client error messages, and server error messages. All of them will be identified by the number which we are going to pass from the response code. As I said, when we talk about something called as a web architecture here, there is a client side and there is a server side. On the client side, we are going to create the request. This request is going to have 2 parts, the header part and the body part. And the server side will be creating a response object, which will be having a headers part and the body part. Both of these headers are nothing but a collection of key value pairs, and both of these bodies will contain some extra information that you want to upload here in the request, and then you want to send back to the client. So depending again on who you are or where the object is getting created, the contents of the body will change, but the concept will remain same. Extra information about that object. Okay, now hopefully you must have understood what is a web architecture, how the request and response works. This is very important for you to know that, right? Sorry, I forgot to see the message here, Bilal. Sometimes there is also query param. What is this? The query parameters or query param will be sent in the request. When you are sending the data from request to the server, maybe I can say send data. So from client, if you want to send the data, there are 3 options available. Again, I'll show this practically also, but right now sending data there are 3 options. One is called as the query string. This is called as the query data. Second one is called as a URL parameters. Again, programmatically, we are going to pass the data later, and then the body. So Bilal, to answer your question, the query parameters are again added to the URLs, or queries, you can call them. This is done by using query string. More on that when we go for practical implementing it. Okay. Where the microservices will come into picture? Abhinav, the microservices will come in the backend application architecture. The application that I showed you, the food delivery application, will be talking about the microservice architecture only. What is the microservices architecture? I'll talk about that later when we go for it. Okay, I'll talk about it, but will not be developing that because it requires more complexities to be handled. So we'll be developing monolithic to start with. If you want, you can proceed further with the microservices on your own. I'll explain what does it mean, by the way. How it is the client mistake if the web page link button, but when clicking it shows 404 error. 404 error means what you are expecting something from the server does not exist on the server. So Ayush, this simply means what you are demanding from the server. Server says I don't have it, but server says I am here to give you something that I'm telling you. These are the these are the resources that you can access. If you're accessing more than something, definitely you are going to get the 404. That's why Ayush, it is a client's error, not the server's error. If something is giving you 404, it's not a server's error, it is rather the client's error. Remember that. All server's code starting with 4, they are all client errors. Okay. Now, when we talk about developing the front end or the back end, they're the tools and technologies that you should know. So, for example, when we go for front end, we can go for pure HTML, CSS, or it's called the vanilla HTML, CSS, and JS, React, Vue, and Angular. All of them are mainly used for developing SPA type application. More on that when we go for something like a React. Right now, just leave it. SPA stands for single page application. For developing the backend, we are having Node.js, Express, Django, Flask, so on and so forth. For database, we are going to have a Mongo, Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, Redis, Redshift, so on and so forth. Again, from the web server, there's Nginx, Apache, Express.js, so on and so forth. API format, you can go for REST, GraphQL, gRPC, or Socket or SOAP. Under DevOps, you can go for Docker, Git, GitHub, CI/CD, Nginx, proxies, so on and so forth. And hosting, it can be done on Vercel. I'll show an example of Vercel. If time permits, I'll show an example of Netfly also. Netlify is called, and then Netlify, then Heroku, AWS, and Render. We are going to use this one and this one. This is pretty standard in case of React, and this is something which is a bit advanced, but I know most of you will like it when we start doing it. So I'm going to show you that as well. Netlify, if time permits, I'll talk about it. Okay. So they are the tools and technologies which we will be using in order to get our application done. Okay, now we'll talk about the next part, something called the browser architecture. Okay, I will not read all of these things. This is for you. I'll pass this file later in the Git repository, and then you can read all those notes later. I'll first explain what do you mean by that. This is important for you to know why Node.js and how Node.js. Okay, any browser that you are using has got 5 different components out there. One is called as the network component. When I say network component, this is the component which is responsible for communicating with the server. As you can see, the client and server communicates over the server, or sorry, over the network. The network component communicates with the server by sending the request and getting the response. One more time, the name itself is telling you network component. The one which is responsible for performing all the network operations is called as the network component. Whatever response it gets, it is going to get it passed to the next one, something called as a rendering engine. This is called as a rendering engine. Sometimes this engine is also known as a layout engine. So layout engine and rendering engine, both of them are almost similar. What is the job of network component? It is a job to send a request and get the response, or have a network communication between the client and server. The rendering engine converts the HTML or CSS or JS. The rendering engine converts HTML, CSS into JavaScript code. Why JavaScript code or why JavaScript objects? The reason is very simple. Browser can execute only one language, and that is JavaScript. Why? It is because it has got JavaScript engine. This JavaScript engine is also known as a browser engine. The entire browser is based upon that JavaScript engine or the browser engine. This is the one which executes the JavaScript. Again, this converts, let me write it here, it converts HTML, CSS into JavaScript objects. And this is the one which executes JavaScript code or JavaScript objects. So execution will be done by using JavaScript engine. Whatever the output is generated, it will be rendered for user on a user interface component. So this one here is user interface component. The name itself is telling you this is the one which is going to create a UI for the user or render the UI for the user. Again, this will be rendered by JavaScript engine. And finally, this is the last component called as a web storage, which is going to be used for storing some data on the client side. Web storage, it is known as. Again, what do you mean by web storage? Web storage stores the data in something called as a session storage or something called as a local storage or something like, bunch of other options available there. Right now the data will be stored right here. Sorry, I need to mention one more thing. Something like it maintains the history, cache, so on and so forth. Now I can say so on and so forth. So every browser has got all these 5 components out there. Doesn't matter which browser you are using. Every component has got these 5 components out there. Every browser has got these 5 components out there. Out of them, these two are very important one, rendering engine and a JavaScript engine. And that is the reason, let me come back here and mention the browser that you are using. For example, whichever browser that you are using, every browser has got it. So this is the browser. This is the rendering engine. Remember that rendering engine. And this one here is something called as the JavaScript engine, JS engine, or it is also known as the browser engine. Okay. Now I'll show you a couple of browsers here, starting with one of the slowest, Edge. It is known as Edge. Edge uses a rendering engine called as Edge HTML. Earlier it was a KHTML. Now this is called as a Edge HTML. The JavaScript engine it uses is something called as a Chakra. The name of that JavaScript engine in Edge is called as Chakra. Next one, let's start with the Firefox. Firefox rendering engine is called as, Gecko. This is called as the Gecko, and the JavaScript engine is called as SpiderMonkey. SpiderMonkey is one of the first JavaScript engine which converted JavaScript application from interpreted to compiled. Today, the JavaScript that you are writing is not interpreted language. It is the compiled language which gets converted into WebAssembly and will be executed by using V8 engine in a second. Next one is the Safari. Safari uses something called as a WebKit. This is the rendering engine of it. And it uses something called as a Nitro JavaScript engine, Nitro JS engine, it is known as. And finally, the most important one, something like a Chrome. Let me put it in a different color. It's very important. Chrome. Chrome's rendering engine is called as the Blink, and Chrome's JavaScript engine is called as V8. I'm going to mark it right now like that, and we'll explain why is it important in tomorrow's session. So right now just understand V8 is something like a JavaScript engine of Chrome browser. Now what happens here is whenever you are using or whenever you are passing the JavaScript code to your browser can easily execute it, because if you look at the architecture here, the browser will get that HTML or CSS or JavaScript, will pass it on to the JavaScript engine, and JavaScript engine will execute the code. So if I want to execute the JavaScript code, I need the JavaScript engine, and the JavaScript engine is available inside the browser, and that is the reason why JavaScript was used only on the client side till 2009. But in 2009, something has changed. What is changed? There was a person named Ryan Dahl. Ryan Dahl said, I want to develop an application on the server side using JavaScript. At that time, it wasn't possible because only browser was having a JavaScript engine. And that is the reason why he tried taking the JavaScript engine out of the browser and he started creating the entire framework. So which browser he took out of which browser? So he took V8, which was the fastest one. Let me mention that also. This is the fastest one. More on that in tomorrow's session as well. Fastest because it is developed in C++, So he took the V8 JavaScript engine and then he created the entire framework around it. And today this framework is known as the Node.js. This is where you should know, or we should start talking about the Node.js. So what is Node.js? Today, in simple one-line statement or one-line definition, it is a framework built around V8 and another library called as libuv. More on that in tomorrow's session. Okay. Network component is going to fetch the data from response body. Yeah, it sends a request and get the response. So probably if you look at this one, this is the one which is going to send a request and get the response. So let me put it like that. It is going to send a request to server, for example, and it is the one which receives the response from server. So whatever server is going to send, it will be received by the network component here. Okay, Siddharth? What debugging tools are we going to use? Multiple, depending again on which site that you are on. More on that later. It's where we are going to go for logging, like Morgan. It's one of the options available there. Okay. What level of experience will I gain from this course? I don't know the name that you are asking the question here, but this is going to be a little bit advanced. So once you start working on this, and provided you are doing it very seriously, you definitely can grab good opportunities in the world. So today industries are looking for React developers. So if you can showcase the application that we are going to develop here, it's more than sufficient for them to get an idea about what kind of project that you can work on. And that is only one project I mentioned. There are a couple of projects I'll be uploading, which is like live coding, and then we can see like how do we get them done here. Yes, Shubham, it's in progress. Yes. Okay, I think we talked enough about today, like what exactly the course here is for, what exactly you can expect it from this course, or what exactly the web architecture and the browser architecture here is. Now, starting from tomorrow, we'll be talking about the Node.js. Rather, starting tomorrow itself, we'll talk about the Node.js, its architecture, what is a single thread application. Then we'll start talking about the modules. Our focus will be on Express.js rather than just learning Node.js, so that's how it is. What about CSS framework? We are expecting, I'm expecting you to know basic CSS, nothing more than that. And when I say basic CSS, you should know how do we use the placements. Again, I'll provide the notes, don't worry. When it comes to the React, I'll provide the notes on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and I will ask you to prepare for them. And then you can start using those to design the entire application, which I showed you there, okay? So, Bautik, you do not need any advanced knowledge of CSS. These are pretty simple CSS CSS rules that we'll be using here. But you need to do it seriously to understand the ins and outs of that, okay? Fine. I think we talked a lot. I think it's better we can stop here for today, and we'll continue later tomorrow with the next part, okay? Again, I welcome all of you to this course. Again, thank you very much for joining me, and I hope I'll see you for the rest of this doing the serious development with me. Okay, Chalo. Again, have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow exactly at 9 o'clock in the evening. Okay, bye bye. Good night.